Good morning, everybody. Let's grab a Bible and open it up to Genesis chapter 8, please. Genesis chapter 8, if you're looking for that in your Bible, it's going to be right after Genesis chapter 7. I think it's on like page 8 or 9 in the blue Bibles. If you came this morning and you did not bring a Bible with you because you don't have one in a translation that you can read or understand, then don't just read that blue Bible. Take it home with you and read it at home. We believe the Bible is how people are transformed by the grace of God and to the glory of God. So two things are happening in my life at a very rapid pace. Number one is that my life perpetually is getting busier and busier, which I know many of us can relate to. And number two is that I am perpetually getting older and older. And both of those things come down to one reality, and it is much harder for me to remember things than it used to be. In fact, right now, I'm looking at a coffee cup that I left here on Wednesday as evidence of that. I know that we can relate to this because David just made an announcement about the lost and found being full, which tells me that there are many other people in this congregation who are also having some trouble with remembering. Remembering is difficult. I have to write it in my calendar now. I was having this conversation this week, and I said, if I don't go ahead and put it in my calendar right now, I will not remember it. I have to constantly do that. I have to constantly force myself to remember things. And I think the only thing that could be worse than me forgetting things or than forgetting things in general is being forgotten about. Isn't that the worst feeling? To be forgotten about, to have made lunch appointment with somebody and to be sitting there waiting, and then you have to send the weird text message of, hey man, are we still meeting? Like, are you still coming? And then you get the weird text message back, of somebody who that normally it's like, oh, I'm just running behind, which I mean, yeah, you're running behind, but you weren't coming, and now you are, so okay, or literally just somebody who just says, I just totally forgot. It hurts. Those are painful. There are far more painful ways to be forgotten about, right? There's the person that waits, there's the kid that waits for mom or dad, that made a promise, they would do a thing, they didn't follow through with, that sticks with you. Sticks with you for your whole life, right? There's the husband or wife that gets promised a date night, other things happen, and they get forgotten about. Painful things. It's a painful thing to be forgotten about. Perhaps the most painful thing are those times when we, as people who are striving to follow Jesus, truly feel like we have been forgotten by God. We pray for things for long periods of time, and we don't see them happen. We wrestle with difficulty and hardship that we're asking for God to remove from our life, and He's not pleased to do so, or we linger as we try to work through some horrible sin that we're trying to put to death, and we just don't feel change happening. We don't see change happening, and all of those times we just feel forgotten about. The good news of the Bible is that it is truly, for the Christian, it is truly nothing more than a feeling. Because we know that God doesn't forget about us. And that really is the central part of what we're going to talk about today in Genesis 8. Because the reality is most of us, at many different points in our Christian life, not just one, at many different points in our Christian life, we need to be reminded of the reality of this whole text in Genesis chapter 8. And it is this: God does not forget about His people. He remembers us. But I wonder if we really know what it means for God to remember. Because God doesn't forget. So how does He remember? He doesn't leave things in the lost and found. And so, what does it mean for God to remember? That's really what I want us to explore today as we read Genesis chapter 8. So if you'll read it with me, read along with me, we're going to read all the way through to verse 19, and that's where we'll stop for today. Genesis 8, 1 through 19. Here's what it says. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot. And she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening. And behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove. But she did not return to him anymore. In the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, "Go out from the ark, you, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you, of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth." So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for your word. Would our hearts and minds be captivated by it today? There is not one thing happening in our world right now more important than the reading and understanding of your word, because you have revealed yourself to us through it. So help us to settle our minds, quieten our spirits, and hear as you speak through your word. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want us to understand today, my goal is for us to have a better understanding of what it means that God remembers his people. It's a great thing to say, it's a better thing to understand, to really know what it means. So I want to see three aspects of God remembering that will help us get a big picture idea of what it means that he remembers. Three aspects of remembering. Number one is this: God remembers because he is gracious and merciful. God remembers because he is gracious and merciful. You know, Genesis 8:1 marks the exact middle of the story of the flood, right? There is a beautiful precision at play here as Moses has recorded this story, as he's communicating it to the people. The way it's recorded is amazing. Okay, so he's recorded the flood story, and everything is staggering because every number has a mirror. So listen, before this point, there were 7 days of waiting for the flood, 40 days of the flood, and for 150 days the water triumphed. And then dead in the middle, you read, God remembered Noah. Then, 150 days the water receded, 40 days of waiting, and then 7 days of waiting. Everything is so precise. Why? Because we worship a God that does not have accidents. Things don't happen by random chance. They happen according to the plan of God. Remember we said last week, God has a plan. God will execute his plan. You are part of that plan, but you're a part of the plan, not the whole plan, right? Everything fits together. And so you see this precision, everything happening exactly the way God had wanted it to do in this beautiful symmetry, and now the waters has receded. But in the middle of this, you see God remembered Noah, dead in the middle. Now, the important thing to understand here is what it doesn't say. It doesn't say God remembered that Noah was a righteous man. It doesn't say God remembered that Noah was really good at shipbuilding, and so he decided he would help him out. It doesn't say God remembered that Noah was obedient. None of those things. It just says God remembered Noah. Why? Because God is merciful. Because God is gracious. And he's extended grace towards these people. He remembered Noah because he chose Noah. He remembered because of his mercy towards Noah. He remembered because he is gracious. Otherwise, it would not have been grace. He remembered Noah on the basis of his character, not Noah's character. God remembers us because of his character, not because of yours. Because we know us well enough to know that it is bad news if our salvation is dependent upon our righteousness. Because you will not be righteous enough, ever. And so we trust that this truth, this idea that it's God and His grace and His mercy, that's what it means to start off with the idea that He would even remember us, ought to be staggering to us. And it ought to cultivate two things. Number one is thankfulness, and number two is humility. The reality is this. If you are sitting here and you are a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, it is a good thing for us to tell ourselves a lot that God did not save me because He needed me. He did not need me. He does not need me. God is self-sufficient. He needs no one or nothing other than Himself. So He didn't save me because if He didn't save me, He couldn't accomplish His purposes. He saved me because He is gracious and merciful to rescue my soul from hell. And so realizing He doesn't love like I love, He doesn't forgive like I would forgive, He doesn't extend grace even like I would extend grace. To realize those things is a calling to cultivate thankfulness in our souls. God, I don't know why You opened my eyes to the reality of the gospel. I don't know why I was dead in trespasses and sins, but You made me alive. I don't know why You did that, but I am thankful. Thankfulness is the response of a converted heart to the good news of Jesus Christ. It ought not be hard for Christians to be thankful. And if it is, we must remind ourselves of the reality of the gospel. He has saved us. Thankfulness. But the other thing that it ought to cultivate in us is humility. Remembering the work of Christ on our behalf. The sovereign pleasure of God to save sinners. We realize that we then have nothing to boast or brag about. Our righteousness is given to us. We have Christ's righteousness on us. In fact, I think you could say that because God has remembered us, we are called to remember Him. And humility is really nothing more than the day-by-day, moment-by-moment action of remembering God and remembering that you are not Him. Both of those things cultivate humility in us. It's the question that the Bible asks, right? What do you have that you have not received? And why do you act as though you haven't received it? We despise it when our children are ungrateful for things. Until we stop to realize that they really are only just imitating us. We are called to cultivate gratefulness in our souls because God is gracious and He is merciful and He remembers us based on His character, not ours. We need to remember that He remembers because He is gracious. But we also need to understand there's a difference between God remembering and us remembering because God's remembering is an active remembrance. So I'm going to give you an example of active remembrance and a way that we ought to remember things. If my dear wife tells me to remember to take out the trash before the trash man comes on Tuesday, here's what she's not encouraging me to do. She's not encouraging me to a moment of deep reflection where I think, I'm supposed to take out the trash. That then results in nothing. She's actually calling me to do what? Remember to take out the trash and then to actually do it. right? God's remembering is an active remembrance. It's not that he forgot Noah. It's not that the waters prevailed for 150 days and he goes, oh yeah, Noah, I better not forget about him. He's floating around on the earth somewhere. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is God is beginning to act as he's always been acting. There was never a moment where he's passive, but now this action is going to take a different form. Right? He's going to start really moving to the point where Noah can see those is advancing in his life, right? You know, I found 74 times in the Old Testament where God remembers his people. You got one or two conclusions. Either he's forgetful. We're going to go with option B, which is it means something very different than it does with us. And what it means first is that he guides his people. For God to remember his people means that there is a sovereign guidance happening in the lives of the children of God. You know what's fascinating about this story, about the flood story, is the flood story as it's recorded in the Bible is not the only flood story that occurs in antiquity, in the old days, okay? There are lots of these, and they're all cheap knockoffs of the story that we have in the Scriptures, right? Let me tell you one of the things that's really different about all of those other stories. In all of those other stories about how the flood happened that didn't occur in the Bible, all of the people who got on the boat were trained sailors. Now, what's the substantial difference there? Well, of course they could navigate the floodwaters. Why? Because they were skilled. You don't read one thing about Noah steering the boat. You know why? Because God steered the boat. He guides his people. It is such a difficult concept to hold on to, isn't it? Like we have to remind ourselves all the time that God is in control. And then we use that in tons of unhelpful ways because we don't even really understand it fully ourselves. And so then we use it as like this pat answer to give to people who are suffering. Well, God is in control. He is. It's true. But we can't see it all the time, right? You know, I got to think somewhere in the midst of this 150 days of riding around with the window shut, Noah had to be reminded that God was in control. Listen, that's our lives. There are going to be seasons of difficulty and hardship and suffering and loss and pain and death and hurt and confusion and broken relationships. All of those things are the reality of living in a broken world, and we are called to come to texts like this and read, but God remembered Noah. And remember, he remembers me in my distress, in my anxiety, in my hardship. I must remember that he remembers me because I am his child. He guides his people. And he delivers an end to the trouble. The good news of the gospel is that one day there will be a glorious end to the trouble. Now let me be clear about what I'm talking about here. I am in no way an advocate for the aberration that is the prosperity gospel. Meaning, I am not telling you that there's going to be an end to the trouble now, because I don't know that. I am telling you that the good news of the gospel is there's an end to the trouble. There will be a day where we are made like him. I don't buy into the idea that God wants you to be prosperous here. I think he's got so much more in store for you. So much more, so much better that will come at the end of the trouble. And so you read this, you don't just read the wind blew, right? I mean, the Bible could have worded it that way. It could have said the wind just blew. But what does it say? Who made the wind blow? Who still makes the wind blow? God, right? You know, what a neat, just think about it this week. What a neat practice that every time you feel the wind, just try this week. Every time you feel the wind blow, just say to yourself, God makes the wind blow. And remember this story about God making the wind blow so there would be an end to the flood. So there would be an end to trouble. So that one day they'd be able to get off the boat and do what God had called them to do. Right? He makes the end happen. And he makes a way for his people where there was no way. It's the very essence of the gospel. So in the same sort of way that God speaks to Noah and says, Noah, it's time to get on the ark. He also speaks to Noah and says, Noah, it's time to get off the ark. He makes a way. He shut the door. He made the wind blow. He opens the door. and the people come out. He makes the way for his people. And that's what it means for God to remember. You know, there are probably some of us today that if you were to be real honest, you would say you feel forgotten about by God. It's an easy thing to feel, right? You know, we say things like, boy, it'd be so much easier for me to not feel forgotten by God if Jesus were just like physically standing here next to me. I would totally not feel forgotten by him. You know, I don't know. I mean, it didn't seem to work out well for Judas. And so I don't know that we can say that with utter confidence. And I read Jesus when he's getting ready to go through the passion, and he says, it's actually better for me that I'm gone. It's better for you that I'm gone, because I'm going to send the Comforter. And so we have the Holy Spirit, right? The issue is that sometimes we tend to look at the truth of Scripture through our experience instead of looking at our experience through the truth of Scripture. The reality is God has revealed himself to us in his word so that we will remember that what he said is true is more true than what we feel is true. That God's word is more true than our feelings. It's what pilots call trusting your instruments. Right? If you fly an airplane, I read a story this week because I don't know a thing about flying an airplane. Doug could tell you all about it. I have no idea. I've been in an airplane, but I can't fly one. But here's what every time you read about these or hear about these things, the first things they teach you to do, apparently, in pilot school is to trust your instruments. I heard a story on a show. It was a Canadian television show called Mayday. Now everybody's going to look it up. But it was all about plane crashes. It's like the most morbid television show ever. But there's this story about a plane that didn't crash, but it almost crashed. and the observers on the outside saw the plane come in. It was coming in real fast, but then the next thing you know, it swerves this way. And then it swerves this way, it pitches up, it pitches down, and it literally bounced when it hit the ground, which is not the way I ever want to land. But it literally bounced when it hit the ground. Well, it hit the ground, people get out, and they start to investigate what went wrong. Well, what went wrong was the engine had a minor malfunction. One of the engines had a minor malfunction, but instead of trusting that was minor, the pilots began to trust their instincts. And their instincts told them that it was a bigger problem than the actual manual said that it was. So then they began the process of overcorrection, right? They began to steer farther this way than that way. Well, then once that happened, they lost view of the horizon, and instead of looking at the instrument that tells them where the horizon was, they tried to find it out of the window. Well, you know what's going to happen at that point? You can't see past the nose, so what are you doing? You're doing this thing. So now you've literally got a plane that's rocking like this, and disaster is imminent, and it was totally grace that they managed to land the plane. Do you know how much of our lives would be radically different if we would just trust the instrument? If we would simply rest in the fact that God has not forgotten about us. If we would simply trust, I know that it feels like everything is upside down. I know that it feels like the whole world is spinning completely out of control. I know that it feels like the wheels are flying off the bus. But God told me in Genesis 8:1 that he remembered Noah. And because I know he's remembered Noah, and I'm going to see him remember Abraham, and I'm going to see him remember his children, and he's going to remember David, and he's going to remember Christ, he has remembered me. He will not forget about his people. The problem comes in when we trust what we feel more than we trust what we know is true. We have become a culture that is completely driven by our feelings. And that's just not sufficient. Your feelings are not a sufficient guide. That is why he has given us his word. He remembers us. Faith is resting in the truth that he remembers us. He remembers us because he is gracious. He remembers us in an active way. And he remembers us because he promised. We so often can base our evaluation of the promises of God based on promises that people around us make. Has anyone ever had a promise broken? Anyone ever had somebody tell you they promised something and they didn't follow through? Okay, so here's the deal. God will never do that. God has never done that. But it begins hard because, again, what happens? Think about it this way. When we trust when we trust our feelings more than we trust Christ, then what we do is we say, I don't know if I can trust Jesus because I can't trust this person. And it's totally backwards, isn't it? Isn't it supposed to be the other way around? You know, all trust of any human is really based on the fact that we first trust God, but so often we totally flip that around. I'm not going to trust God because I don't trust people. But God remembers His promises, and He always keeps them. In fact, He has already kept them in Christ. Remember way back in Genesis 3, the whole book's connected, right? Genesis 3, we see the fall happen, right? The terrible decision that Adam made. And God pronounces the curse. And then you get this promise that one day someone was going to come and crush the head of the serpent. God remembers that promise. He's going to follow through with that. We get to Genesis 4 and you read about Lamech, right? Noah's dad, who makes up this song. And he says, one day my son will give us rest. Now what's interesting is, you know what the name Noah means? Rest, to rest, okay? The only rest that Noah gave was when you read in the scripture that the ark rested on top of the mountains. It's a play on words. It's on purpose, right? But there's this hope. There's this promise that continues to be advancing, right? The ark rests. Humanity is given the charge. They walk out, and God says one more time, be fruitful and multiply. Where do we hear that? The beginning, right? At creation. What does He tell humans to do? Be fruitful and multiply. They're going to go out and do it again. And you know what's going to happen? Sinners are going to be born, and they're going to continue to sin. Wickedness is going to continue to exist in this world because Noah was a part of the promise. God made a promise to Noah. And Noah is advancing the promises and purposes of God. But something else has to happen. Remember how I said, when you're reading this story, when you're Israel listening to this story, there's this expectation that you go, oh, maybe Noah's the one. And you get right about here, and there's this sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. Maybe he's not the one. Maybe there needs to be someone else. Someone else has to come. We know, because we have all of the Word of God, who that someone is. That's Jesus. He will come. God, the initiative taker, has advanced His promises. Again, that's one of the things the Bible wants you to be clear about. It is God who takes the initiative in advancing His purposes, in bringing salvation to His people, in seeing His purposes accomplished. It is God who takes the initiative. He moves first. And so we get to this point in this story and we see the active God of the Bible moving to accomplish what He has promised. As we worship an active God. In the midst of feeling forgotten about, it sometimes feel as though God is inactive. That is not true. God is at work in our lives as believers in 10,000 ways that we will never be aware of. And we say things like, well, we'll know when we get to heaven. I do not believe my brain will be big enough in heaven either to fathom the eternal and sovereign purposes of the God in heaven and earth. So I'm satisfied in knowing that I will never know a gazillion things, but I know Him. And that is enough because I rest in His plan. I rest in His way. No moment of our lives is insignificant. Everything that's happening is accomplishing, as Paul says, a weight of glory. Even the things that we feel are overwhelming here that Paul calls what? A light and momentary affliction. Accomplishing the weight of glory. And there are times in our lives that feel neither light nor momentary. But when compared to eternity, they are. We worship a God who remembers. You know, there's a really powerful story of God remembering in the New Testament, too, right? Everything we just saw with Noah, we see perfected in the life of Christ. Christ willingly came to earth, right? He chose to be here. He humbled Himself. He took on flesh, and everything happened. We spent 3 years in the book of Luke And one of the things I hope we saw is that everything that happens in the life of Jesus happens because Jesus wants it to happen in the life of Jesus. He's not some passive spectator who's just randomly following along and circumstances are happening. No, no, no. He's sovereign God of heaven and earth. Things are happening according to His plan. He's making them happen, all the way to death, even death on a cross. Every part of it. This is how He could look at Pilate when he was on trial and say, "You would have no authority over me, except for that it was given from above." See, Pilate wasn't the boss. Jesus was the boss. He was the one making it happen. His life, His betrayal, and even His crucifixion was exactly the divine plan of God. When the crucifixion happened, it was exactly the divine plan of God that He would be hung on a cross with a criminal on either hand, and that one of those criminals would look at Him and mock Him. If you're the Son of God, save yourself and us, and make a mockery of the Son of God. But there would be another criminal, right, who called this guy down, and he looks at Jesus and he says one simple thing. You guys remember what it is? Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus, in the most certain words He could use, said what? Today, you will be with me in paradise. He remembered the criminal. He remembered Noah. And He remembers you. Regardless of the suffering, whether it be physical or emotional or spiritual, He remembers you. And He does not forget. He has promised us His Son. And it is enough. We've got to remind ourselves of truth. We've got to learn and practice the enoughness of Jesus in our lives. And so we remember Him in an active way. We live humble lives of repentance, thankful that we have received such great mercy. We live lives of utter trust, believing that what He has said is more true than what we are experiencing. We live lives of joy, even in the midst of great sorrow and difficulty, remembering that He has kept His promises. That joy is for any who would believe and trust in Him. You may be a Christian, and joy may be the last thing that you would describe your life as over the last few weeks, months, years, decades. Friends, I want to encourage you, the darkness will not last forever. He has overcome the darkness. I will not give you a timetable because that's not helpful. But I will say that one day the darkness will lift. We'll be with Him face to face. And it won't be hard to feel joy then, will it? It'll be hard to find because He'll be standing in visible bodily form right in front of us. We hope and we long for that day. That's how we make it through some of the most difficult times in life, knowing that not every time will be difficult, not every day will be hard, because God has remembered. Now, if you're not a Christian, this same joy is available to any whose eyes have been opened, who've repented of their sins and believed in the Lord Jesus. But Jesus made it clear. If we long for this, we must be willing to do what it takes. And Jesus says, if any man wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. You can have this joy. In order to have it, you must be willing to give your life away. For some, that seems too high a cost. But for those of us who know Christ, we know we never really owned it in the first place. It was His. So we give it back to Him. But if you have never experienced the joy of knowing that one day you will be face to face with Christ, all you must do is turn from your sin, submit your life to Christ, trust in Him. You'll be saved. Friends, we are called to repent and believe. May we do so with humble hearts, remembering that we are remembered. Let's pray. We're going to play softly just one song because we like to have a moment before the rest of the day goes crazy to remember the goodness of God and His Word to us. I just want to encourage you to take the time that's been given, just reflect on what it means to be remembered. Pray with me. Father, the very fact